All right, so this recording is for Romeo and Juliet. This is going to be in regards to the prologue and Act 1. To start off with the prologue is at the beginning of the play. Before any act, any scene, any character takes the stage, the prologue, which is actually a chorus, takes place. So the chorus comes out, and the chorus simply reads out 16 lines that tell the audience, or you, the reader, what the play is about. And they tell you everything. They tell you that the main conflict that you will see throughout the whole play is the hatred between two families. That those two families are the Montagues, which is actually Romeo's family, and the Capulets, which is Juliet's family. So you can see where the trouble is going to take place. The prologue, the chorus who talks during the prologue mentions that Romeo and Juliet are star-crossed lovers. In other words, that they're going to have a tragic ending by the end of this play. Now, you might think that that's kind of a spoiler, but in reality, it's not. It's telling you that in advance to kind of tell you this is where we start, these two families hating each other, and this is where we end, where Romeo and Juliet take their own lives. But what happens in between, they leave that for you to fill in. In other words, to see the play. Now, it's important that they're mentioned as star-crossed lovers. There's a significance behind that. There's symbolism behind that. Now, star-crossed lovers. Stars in literature are usually symbolic of our future, our fate, what will happen to us. It's written in the stars is an old saying. That in other words, whatever's going to happen to us has already been set in place by quote unquote the stars. That no matter what you do, it's going to happen to you. Now, this is important that the play mentions Romeo and Juliet as star-crossed lovers, because it's bringing up a major theme, a major point of the play. One of the main messages of the play is, do we decide our own future, or is our future already chosen by us? Is our destiny and our fate already chosen by us? And that's something that the play leaves the audience to make their own decision on. There are things that are going to happen in this play that you think people are, making a choice or doing what they, making a choice for themselves. And there's things that happen in this play that you're thinking this is just karma, in other words, or this is bad luck. This is just fate. It was meant to happen this way. And there's nothing they can do. Now, at the end of the prologue, the chorus says, in the next 2 hours, they will fill in, the play that will take place will fill in everything that happens in between. And that's where we start on Act 1. Now, Act 1 starts off with two servants of the Capulet's house. Okay? It starts off with these two friends talking trash, boasting about how manly they are and what they'll do and what they can do. And if they find an enemy, in other words, somebody from the Montague family or the Montague family on the streets, they will fight them. They will do what they want with the Capulet women, so on and so forth. Okay, so these two friends that are of the Capulets run into the street with two of the Montagues, and sure enough, little by little, they start insulting each other, and it ends up in a fight. So the Montagues and the Capulets start to fight with each other on the street. And then we are introduced into two of our main characters, which is Tybalt and Benvolio. Benvolio is a Montague. Tybalt is a Capulet. So Tybalt is actually cousins with Juliet. Benvolio is actually cousins with Romeo. Now, it's interesting that they show these two characters right off the bat, because it shows how, you can kind of see already who's going to be causing a lot of the trouble, which is actually Tybalt. Tybalt is a feisty one. He wants to fight with anybody or anything. Benvolio is more of the peaceful one. He wants to keep the peace. Now, after the fighting takes place and after it starts getting out of hand, in comes the prince. The prince simply says, I've had enough of it. From here on out, next time that the Capulets and the Montagues fight, whoever starts the fight is going to be sentenced to death. So now the stakes are raised. The prince says no more. And of course, it's the start of the play. You know there's going to be another fight. You know someone's going to get in trouble. As we move on through the play, through Act 1, we're then introduced to Romeo. We're introduced to him by stories that Benvolio and Romeo's father tell about him. We had come to find out Romeo is actually a sentimental guy. He's not your typical guy. He's what you would call, the usual love. He's a lover, not a fighter. So, old Capulet, Romeo's father, Lady Capulet, Romeo's mother, and Benvolio are talking about how Romeo has seemed depressed lately. He seems to be kind of always walking around with his head down. He's always crying. He's locking himself in his room. And they're kind of worried about this, of what's going on with our son. So, Benvolio goes over to talk to him. They end up running into each other in the streets. And we come to find out Romeo is depressed. But he's depressed because he's actually in love with a girl who doesn't love him back. Now, here's the interesting thing. The girl that he loves is not Juliet yet. The girl that he actually loves at the start of the play is a woman named Rosaline. The interesting thing is we never see Rosaline. We never even get to meet her. She never even has lines in the story. So we find out that it's Rosaline, not Juliet, who he is in love with and depressed over. He mentions that he probably will never be able to find anybody just as good as Rosaline, that he's like a blind man, that no other woman exists to him. And that's where part of the first act ends. Then we meet Paris. Paris appears in the play later on in Act 1. Paris is actually trying to marry Juliet. He actually is visiting Lord Capulet, which is Juliet's father, and asking for Juliet's hand in marriage. Here's the interesting thing. Juliet is only 13. And even her father, which is Lord Capulet, says, my daughter's a little too young yet, But the Prince Paris does want to marry her, does want to have her as a wife. Now, you probably think this is a little weird, but the thing is, back in the day when this play was written, a 13-year-old getting married was not a weird thing. It was actually kind of acceptable, and it happened. Now, Lord Capulet tells Paris, look, I can't give you my daughter's hand in marriage, but what I will do is this. I will throw a party. You come to the party, and you can meet her there. And from there, let's see what happens. So they agree on that. Next, we're introduced to Juliet. We're introduced to Juliet, Lady Capulet, which is Juliet's mother, and the nurse, which is Juliet's nurse. Now, Juliet's nurse, who in the play they call the nurse, is more of a mother to Juliet than her actual mother. We come to find out that it's actually the nurse who raised her and actually breastfed her, not Juliet's mother. Juliet's mother seems to be more interested in the social things. In other words, she's more interested in her daughter, Juliet, getting married to Paris and having, a well-off life. In other words, not having to worry about money, not having to worry about anything. The nurse is very crass. In other words, she doesn't have a filter. What comes out her mouth, is whatever comes out her mouth. In other words, she doesn't think that what she's saying might be kind of offensive. So she is that kind of lady that will just say whatever's on her mind. And she mentions about how Juliet is of a ripe age. And we actually come to find out the nurse actually had a daughter that was Juliet's age, but the daughter has died, as so well has her husband. So even more, you see the nurse kind of look at Juliet not just as the person that she serves, but as her own daughter. So you see that development there, and you kind of start to realize, Lady Capulet doesn't really, she does love her daughter, but doesn't love her as much as maybe the nurse does. We move on. All right. We're introduced to Mercutio. Mercutio. Mercutio is a special character. Mercutio is friends with Romeo. Okay, he's best friends with Romeo. And Mercutio is sort of the life of the party. He is always, ready to have a good time. Always ready to have a good time. And it's interesting to see Mercutio and Romeo interact. Mercutio sees love as something you don't pay too much attention to. In other words, love is something that you do once, you have fun with, and you never do it again. Who cares? Romeo sees love as this great thing that you find that person you love, you marry them, you have kids, you have a family. Romeo is very idealistic about love. Mercutio, on the other hand, rather just go out, find love for the night, and that's it. Leave. All right, so that's one thing we find out about Mercutio. Mercutio also has a very interesting name. Mercutio sounds very much like the word mercury. Now, mercury, if you don't know what it's used for, actually it's what you put in the thermometer. It's used in thermometers, mercury is. And mercury will rise and fall depending on the temperature. Same way Mercutio is. Mercutio's attitude and the way he is rises and falls depending on the situation he's in. And we come to find that out in Act 1, that Mercutio can be happy-go-lucky, can be, calm. And then in a moment's notice, he can be angry. He can be almost like a wild man. So it's interesting to see him, how he is interacting with Romeo. Romeo, again, is more of the lover and everything, while Mercutio is just kind of the wild man, So that is something interesting to see how those two interact. But yet you can tell Mercutio and Romeo are really good friends, and they really do truly care about each other. Mercutio encourages Romeo to go to the party, to go to the Capulet party, to get over Rosaline. He also wants Romeo to, get back to his own self, to be the happy guy that he was. And Mercutio finally convinces Romeo to go to the Capulet party. Well, now, we know as the audience he's going because Rosaline's going to be there. Okay, we find out Rosaline's going to be there, so we know Romeo's going to the Capulet party really because Rosaline's there. Mercutio, Benvolio, and the rest of his friends think that Romeo's going because he's probably going to try to get over Rosaline, but we know the truth. Finally, we have the party scene. Now, the party is actually really interesting because that is the first time Romeo and Juliet meet. Romeo and Juliet fall in love instantly when they see each other at the party. Romeo, all of a sudden, from the first moment he sees Juliet, completely forgets about Rosaline. Rosaline doesn't even exist anymore in his mind. Excuse me. Romeo compares Juliet to almost a religious figure. It sounds weird, but he does. He almost compares her to a religious figure. He woos her. In other words, he tries to attract her by the way he talks to her. And the way he talks to her is very much almost in a worshiping way. Like he worships her the moment he has seen her. He talks about how, he would love to almost treat her like his new religion. Okay? So the instant attraction from Romeo to Juliet is there. And we come to find out Juliet is crazily mad in love and attracted at first sight, or in love at first sight, with Romeo as well. She gives in to, what she sees in Romeo. And you can just tell that they truly have fallen in love with each other. Now, an interesting thing that happens at the party is that Tybalt, which is, again, which is Juliet's cousin and an enemy of the Montagues, which Romeo is a part of, sees that Romeo's at the party and is actually about to kill him at the party. But Lord Capulet stops him and says, "There's no way you're going to cause a murder at my party." But Tybalt swears that he's not going to let this go. And he's going to kill Romeo whenever he gets the chance. Because by Romeo showing up to the party, to the Capulet party, since he is a Montague, is a dishonorable thing in Tybalt's eyes. So that plays a part later on. We come to find out Romeo and Juliet had no idea that they were from the opposite families. Romeo, before the party's over, finds out that Juliet is actually a Capulet, and he mentions that he can't believe that he's fallen in love with somebody from the family of his worst enemy. Juliet says the same thing. She can't believe she has fallen in love with the only son of her worst enemy. And that is where Act 1 ends. It ends with them two realizing that the person they have fallen in love with at first sight is from the enemy. Now, things to note about Act 1 is simply it is setting the grounds for the major, setting the grounds to intensify the major conflict. You got to remember the major conflict throughout this whole thing is the Montagues and the Capulets simply hate each other. We don't know why. Remember, we have no clue why they hate each other. We know it's something that happened a long time ago, and they're still holding on to whatever it is that they hate each other for. So, the other thing that's also important to keep in mind is the play on whether we choose our destinies or our destinies are already chosen for us. For example, Romeo could not decide who he fell in love with. Romeo just simply fell in love with Juliet. Same thing with Juliet. Juliet couldn't choose who she fell in love with. She just simply fell in love with Romeo. So it wasn't so much a choice. It's just something that happened in life. So again, that kind of backs the point of life chooses the path we go down. We don't have a choice. Our fate chooses the path we go down. But at the same time, Romeo had the choice of not going to the party, but he still decided to go to the party. So in a way, he kind of made that choice. All right. Other than that, that should catch you up to about Act 1. And we should be starting Act 2 sometime soon. All right. Goodbye.